Have you ever wondered what it feels like to stop World War III by accident? Not in a war room, not surrounded by presidents or generals, but alone, underground, with one decision, one call, standing between life and nuclear death for millions. This is the story of Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, a Soviet officer you've probably never heard of.
It's September 26th, 1983. The Cold War is near its boiling point. Just weeks earlier, the Soviet Union had shot down Korean Air Flight 007. 269 civilians dead, including a US congressman.
Anxiety had started to mount when the flight from New York to Seoul, with a stop in Anchorage, wasn't heard from for several hours. Then came the unavoidable savage truth. It had disappeared from the sky itself by a heat-seeking missile fired by a Soviet Su-15 interceptor. Among those presumed dead, United States Senator Larry McDonald and at least 30, possibly 40 other Americans and an Australian family of 4. In Washington, Secretary of State Schultz said this was no accident. President Reagan, at his Californian ranch, was said to have been briefed continually.
Words can scarcely express our revulsion at this horrifying act of violence.
President Ronald Reagan calls the USSR an evil empire.
Declare its omnipotence over individual man and predict its...
Moscow suspects the Americans are preparing a first strike. Everyone is on edge, even machines. Petrov wasn't supposed to be working that night. He was covering for another officer, arriving at Serpukhov 15, a top-secret early warning center just south of Moscow. His job was to monitor US missile launches. If any are detected, sound the alarm. Trigger a counterattack. The system was new, satellite-based, rushed into service, unproven. And Petrov? He had helped write the system's manual. He knew both its potential and its flaws.
It was right after midnight when the silence was shattered. The screen flashed red. Missiles launch detected. A single intercontinental ballistic missile launched from the United States. The protocol was clear. Report immediately to the higher command. One call from Petrov would send in motion thousands of warheads.
But he paused. He frowned. Something didn't feel right.
Nobody uses a teaspoon to slowly fill a bucket.
He mumbles. Who would launch only one missile? You don't start a war with a single shot. Then came a second missile, a third, a fourth, a fifth. The computer confirmed maximum probability of attack. But still, there was no radar confirmation, no ground tracking, no visual evidence, just satellite data from a system barely a year old. Petrov said, I had a funny feeling in my gut. I didn't want to be the cause of World War III. He picked up the red phone. The room fell silent. He reported,
Probably a false alarm.
And then they waited. He waited. 17 excruciating minutes, the time it takes to reach the missiles from United States to the Soviet Union. Time slow. Each second could have meant global destruction, disaster. But no missile came, no war started. Petrov had been right.
You would think that saving the world might earn you a medal, a parade, or at least a thank you. But for Petrov, it brought a reprimand, not for the decision itself, but for failing to properly log the incident. Petrov said, "I had the phone in one hand, the intercom in the other. I didn't have a third hand to write in the logbook." A year later, he quietly left the military. For decades, no one knew what he had done. Not even his own family. Now let's think about that moment. He disobeyed a direct protocol. Had he been wrong? Had it truly been an attack? Cities would have vanished. His inaction could have meant the end of Soviet Union, his homeland. But if he had followed orders, billions could have died in a nuclear strike based on just a glitch. So, was it a good decision? Objectively, yes. But more than that, it was a humane decision, a deeply rational, ethical one. At such a critical juncture of his life, Petrov was able to avoid recklessness. In a world dominated by automation, ideologies, and fear, he chose to reason. He chose to think. He chose life over protocols. Petrov often says he doesn't want to be seen as a hero. He was just doing his job and fulfilling his duty. But he also adds that the world can be glad that I was in command that night. This is what ethical leadership looks like. Not just blindly obeying commands, but bearing the responsibility for their consequences. At no point in his life did Petrov crave power. His only wish was for peace.
The world survived the night of September 26, 1983. Not because of machines, systems, or any government. It survived because one man took a pause. Today, the doomsday clock stands at 90 seconds to midnight, closer than it has ever been. Global tensions are escalating. AI and automation are replacing human judgment. But if history has taught us anything at all, it's this. The survival of humanity often comes down to one person, making the right decision at the right moment. We may never face the same impossible choice that Stanislav Petrov did. But his legacy burns bright in the darkness, reminding us of something profound. The courage to pause, the wisdom to question, the compassion to think of others. These may be our last line of defense, the thin barrier between survival and silence. In a world racing toward the brink, sometimes the most heroic act is simply to stop, to think, to choose humanity over protocol. That choice, that moment of grace, might just save us all.